iPhone sales, M5 Max benchmarks, the MacBook Neo price to performance, AirPods, the logo being a status symbol for many. It seems like Apple is just a genius brand obliterating any competition in its way if there's any left. I mean, why get a dull laptop when you could get this shiny new MacBook Neo or MacBook Air in a nice blue color, right? They are one of the most valuable companies in today's market. I think valued over $4 trillion. But how were they able to pull this off in the last 50 years? In this video, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the history of Apple, what actually made their products so successful, and how the competition is actually doing. First off, where did Apple come from? In 1976, Steve Wozniak just finished a cool project he has been working on, and he showed it off to his buddy, Steve Jobs. It was a circuit board that would soon be called the Apple I, Apple's actually first ever computer. Now we can actually already see the first piece of success here in their story. The Apple I was able to connect to a TV at that time and could read and write on cassette with blazing speed at that time. Wozniak really gained his respect here. When Jobs saw this thing, he basically said, let's sell this thing, let's make money. And in April of 1976, they started a new company called Apple. Apple was officially born. And soon enough, the Apple II already came. Their second computer, with a focus on it being convenient to use and with a simple and elegant design. It quickly became a standard for a business app called VisiCalc. And VisiCalc is something similar to Excel, but then way before its time. So immediately there was business appeal for this computer. The Apple II also stayed a popular device for a long time. In 1980, about 4 years after Apple was set up, they went public on the stock market. And they hit an insane value of almost $2 billion on the market on its first day. Can you imagine that? So we can probably say that Apple is doing very well at this point. But they were not the only ones. The competition, they came. One of the competitors was IBM, Internet Business Machines. Now, the computers Apple made, they were not, of course, perfect, and there were flaws with these computers. And soon enough, the IBM PC took over in sales. Apple tried again with their Lisa in 1983. This computer had an advanced GUI that also had mouse support. Imagine in the early 80s using a mouse. It looked like a pretty cool device, but the insane price of almost $10,000 just didn't cut it for them. Also, it had limited compatibility, so it was pretty much obsolete for many people. The first Macintosh that came 1 year later was unfortunately also a flop. At this point, Apple had it rough. They continued making Macs with a little bit of success, but in 1995 they almost filed for bankruptcy. Steve Jobs, he went away from the company for a little bit and he came back and decided to just entirely restructure Apple. Under him, the first iMac and macOS X were released. The iMac quickly became a big success for Apple. In 2001, they released the iPod, also major success. Then iTunes came, same, huge success. The iPhone in 2007, gigantic success. I think the most successful product of Apple ever. And eventually also the Apple Watch came, also a major success. And we can add to the list their Apple Silicon, beating the competition basically. But how did they get here, where we are today? Let's dive into the big successes they were able to pull off. A good point in time to talk about is the release of the first iMac. When you look at PCs from the 90s, they are pretty much stereotypical, like with the beige plastic and the big margins, the very thick monitors. You know what I'm talking about. Now compare that to the very first iMac. This thing was different. It hit different. It was colorful, it had a sleeker design, it was also easier to use, it was just one device. With this iMac, they now had created a passion for the user experience and decided to focus on that. If you were alive in the early 2000s, then there's a good chance you have at least heard of the iPod. You may have used one, you may have owned one. Before its release in 2001, MP3 players were kinda heavy. They were bulky. They couldn't really store that much. The iPod, however, it was light for its time. It was surprisingly light. It could store many songs. Maybe you've heard that claim of 1,000 songs in your pocket. And it was thin for a change. It's not really a secret that the iPod sold by hundreds of millions across the world, simply because it was the sleeker product. Now, 6 years after 2001, in 2007, yeah, I think you already know what happened back then. The iPhone was a combination of devices. Quoting the man himself, an iPod, a phone and an internet communicator. The iPhone missed a physical keyboard and a stylus, relying on multi-touch input, something that was pretty new at that time. But how did it become such an icon in the world of technology, like it is today? Well, first off, the iPhone was built around a very flat learning curve, and they also focused on making a super intuitive user experience. And these are just things they value more than the crazy customizability of the green robot. Well, that has changed in recent years, but I think they still value the user experience and the ease of use more than customizability. Also, Apple is in quite a unique position of both making the hardware and the software as a single company. They make the iPhone, of course, but they also make iOS. Well, technically they don't really make the iPhone, that's the manufacturer, of course, but you know, they designed the iPhone, and so yeah. This combination results in a super optimized platform, which is nice for both users but also developers. They really want developers to develop for Apple devices. And this also applies to the Mac and the iPad. Now then, we cannot miss the Apple ecosystem. The walled garden you cannot escape once you get into it. Yeah, of course you can escape, but inside this walled garden they keep you hooked in buying more and more of Apple devices alone, because they work so intuitively and so easily with each other. As soon as you bring in an Android device or a Linux device, it's just going to break. Whether you like it or not, whether you care about it or not, the walled garden is a thing. You simply don't want to get out anymore. You can copy something from your iPhone to your Mac. AirPods can switch between devices. Yeah, that only works as long as you have an iPhone. If you have an Android device, then say goodbye to your Apple Watch functioning like normal. Also AirDrop. Although the garden has been overgrowing a little bit. I have heard of Samsung phones and Google Pixel phones being compatible with AirDrop, which is maybe nice to see for Android devices, maybe not so nice to see for Apple themselves. Ah yes, the peer pressure. The instant messaging app iMessage works very well between iPhones, but the seamlessness of it just simply ceases to exist as soon as you get an Android. This also applies to FaceTime, by the way. Next, the logo itself has become a status symbol for many. If you have an iPhone, that may just mean it's more worth, even though it may be the cheapest iPhone ever. And as soon as you slap another logo on it, it is seen as this cheap brand only poor people use. Peasants. And the rather high starting price for many Apple products also contributes to this. And of course, FaceTime. No, but seriously, just use the Signal app if this really is an issue for you. That works just with Android and iOS just fine, at least I hope. And lastly, Apple has made some serious success with their Apple Silicon chips in their Macs. About 5 years ago, Apple made the switch from Intel processors towards their own processors, now referred to with an M. The Intel powered Macs had problems with overheating, poor battery life and thermal throttling, something I can relate to. Apple just had enough of this and took matters into their own hands. Apple already had experience with making efficient chips for their iPhones and iPads. They both need to be energy efficient but also super powerful. There was even this thing I read about the A19 Pro beating a desktop CPU with like single core performance. By introducing the M series chips, Macs have become very powerful and yet very well optimized. Well, good for them. So how are other tech companies doing? Trying to leave a mark on the tech of this world while having to compete against this American giant? Well, let's take a quick look at Android. For years, companies that sell Android devices have been a bit more experimental with their devices. Whether this is foldables, crazy camera setups, curving screens, RGB on the back, or 200 megapixel zooming. But they are also usually the more budget-friendly option. Sure, you can get a crazy expensive Android for like, I don't know, 3,000 bucks. You can also just get a very cheap Android device for 100 bucks that does almost the same things as the average iPhone does. Let's be honest, you don't really need the newest iPhone. Because of this wide range in price and the ability to more easily combine ecosystems like having a Google Pixel Watch on your wrist while using a Fairphone, I think these are the reasons the majority of smartphones these days run on Android and not on iOS. Let's talk about Windows for now, because I think they are struggling on the laptop side with trying to compete with Apple. The MacBook Neo was recently released and I think it's just quite a bomb for laptop manufacturers. You have this crazy, well-priced and pretty powerful, sleek MacBook Neo that has to compete, or that doesn't even need to try to compete with any Windows laptop at this price. Apple in this case also does the hardware and the chip and the software, so they don't really need to rely on Intel or AMD to provide them with good CPUs or rely on Microsoft to get some better Windows 11. So yeah, I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to see in the world of laptops, and especially budget laptops in the near future. Now, when it comes to PC building, I think that's not going away anytime soon, because people love to build PCs. They love to upgrade their PCs over a period of 15 years. They also love the raw GPU power dedicated graphics cards provide instead of the efficiency of Apple Silicon. Also, I think the sheer options and customizability and the fact that you can get Linux or Windows all contribute to the fact that people just love PC building, as expensive as that may get. So yeah, I think we can conclude that Apple's success is mainly because of their focus on the user experience and the ease of use of their products. And of course also the Apple ecosystem that also just prints them a lot of money, I think. It's just this seamlessness between devices that people get really hooked to. We can also add the fact that they can release the sleeker device at the right time. So the iMac was a sleeker version of the PC, the iPod was a sleeker version of the MP3 players before that. The iPhone, we can pretty much say, was also a sleeker version of the mobile phones we had before that. So yeah, those things are indeed big factors when it comes to Apple's success. And of course, Apple Silicon. I think Apple Silicon is a pretty important revolution in technology, and I also think that sweet single core performance and efficiency is winning people over toward the Apple experience. Thank you so much for watching. I made a video about how your smartphone can save your life. You can watch that right here. I also made a video about x86 versus ARM that also talks about Apple Silicon. That video you can watch here. Alright, I'll see you in the next one.